The pandemic has, of course, had a huge impact on the automotive industry. The entire European production were closed for several weeks, and in many countries, the showrooms were also closed. This resulted in a reduction of new car registration in April of nearly 80%. But what we can see now is that in many countries, different support schemes are introduced. So far, these support schemes have mainly been focusing on increasing the demand for low and zero-emitting vehicles. This will, of course, accelerate the introduction of these more environmentally friendly vehicles. But we also know that many manufacturers are struggling at this time, and we will see if they have the resources to ramp up the production of these new energy vehicles in the pace that is needed. Accounting for almost 40% of the aluminium demand, the automotive industry is a very important customer for the European aluminium industry. So of course we feel the impact of this crisis as well. When the automotive industry came to a halt in April, so did also the entire supply chain. What we can see now, however, is that the aluminium industry is responding very fast to the increased demand of aluminium components. And we also see that we can deliver the material the automotive industry needs to ramp up their production again. What we also believe in is that the increased focus on electromobility can have a positive impact on the aluminium industry, as electric vehicles in general use much more aluminium than conventional ones. The average aluminium content in vehicles produced in Europe today is around 180 kilos. In electric vehicles, we see that the aluminium content is much higher than that. Aluminium is today the material of choice for many components that are critical for electric vehicles. For example, in battery boxes, cables, and cooling solutions. We can also see that lightweighting plays a very important role for electric vehicles as well. With the heavy weight of the batteries, aluminium can help to keep the total weight within a reasonable limit to maintain a good drivability and a good energy efficiency. That's a very difficult question, and I would rather rely on a forecast from other experts on that. What we do believe, however, is that the European Commission and the Member States need to act fast to support the automotive industry. The uncertainty in the current situation is not good for anyone. From the aluminium industry side, we have highlighted 3 areas that we think would be of key importance for a speedy recovery. First of all, we would like to see renewal schemes focusing on stimulating the demand of vehicles. And this needs to be put in place as quick as possible to avoid having customers postponing their decisions to buy a car. Secondly, we want to ensure that type approval facilities across Europe are opened up again, so that the vehicle manufacturers can put their new vehicle models on the market. And thirdly, we want to see a kickstart of the investments in charging infrastructure to support the uptake of these new electric vehicles on the market. This crisis really shines a light on Europe's dependence on strategic materials like aluminium and the consequences of supply chain disruptions. And looking ahead, we would be particularly worried that the raw materials necessary for the Green Deal and the digital transitions are today mostly sourced outside of the European Union. And this generates carbon-intensive imports into our continent. And this is even more important that those materials are threatened by global trade distortions from countries that are subsidizing their domestic material production. I really think that European policymakers and businesses will see the value of more regional supply chains in the future. Global competition, especially from China, will ramp up fiercely in the post-COVID-19 world. The Chinese threat to the European aluminium industry remains significant due to its massive subsidized excess production. And the volumes available make the Chinese industry capable of entirely replacing the European aluminium industry with a significantly higher carbon footprint. A reduced European production will only increase our dependency on primary import and thus resulting in a much higher carbon footprint in Europe. In this context, Europe should really reinforce its strategic autonomy by supporting the existing industry and bringing production back to Europe instead of relying on carbon-intensive imports. Aluminium is an important enabler of low-emission vehicles. First of all, its lightweight properties is making any car more energy efficient, no matter if it's a combustion engine car or an electric one. And in the new electric vehicles we see now, the aluminium industry is supplying many critical parts. It is, for example, a perfect material for the battery boxes, as it can provide both structural protection and can improve the heat management of the battery pack. Being fully recyclable, aluminium is also a material that can be used over and over again. When the car reaches its end of life, between 90 and 95% of the aluminium in the car is recycled and ready to be used in new car components again. One of our main goals are to reduce our CO2 emissions by achieving aluminium's full circularity in Europe. To do this, a significant research effort and investments are needed to unlock the full potential of aluminium recycling. The aluminium industry is willing to make the necessary investments, but there must be a fair market and predictable regulatory framework to make these investments possible. The European Commission should create the right incentives to promote the circular material handling along the entire value chain, and they should also stimulate investments in more modern collection and sorting technologies. We would also like the EU to implement a more forward-looking competition policy with tools to prevent carbon and investment leakage and at the same time support the decarbonization of European industries. I will give you one example. The high electricity cost in Europe must be compensated in order to ensure that production stays here. Electricity cost represents up to 40% of the total primary production cost in Europe. Compared to all our main competitors, Europe has higher electricity prices due to increased cost under the EU emission trading scheme. And no aluminium smelter outside of Europe is exposed to carbon costs in their electricity prices. To maintain production here in Europe, the aluminium industry therefore needs an improved compensation system for the indirect cost linked to the EU emission trading schemes. And this is not only important for the aluminium industry. To close down European production and replace it with imported aluminium from China is also a bad choice for the environment. As a last point, I would like to mention the CO2 regulation for cars and vans. The way the CO2 emissions are currently regulated, a heavier car is allowed to emit more than a lighter one. And this is something we think must change. Having a regulation that discourages using lightweighting as a tool to comply with the target is reducing the cost efficiency of the regulation. If the CO2 targets instead would have been based on the size of the vehicle, the manufacturers would have been able to fully benefit from their investments in lightweight technologies.